Lots going on actually. Obviously, with some of the stuff going on with the coronavirus, the essential business thing was big in Florida. Big sales, really sales were skyrocketing here in Florida. One of the biggest things going on though right now in Florida is the Florida grown case. So essentially, the lower court has deemed our vertically integrated structure to be unconstitutional. The appellate court, are contrary to the Florida Constitution, and the
Right.
appellate court has affirmed that, and now it's up to the Florida Supreme Court. And early in May, they had oral hearings on that matter. And quite honestly, I talked to a lot of people. I watched the oral hearings, and I still think it's a 50-50 shot. I think both sides made some pretty decent arguments, and we'll just have to see how the Florida Supreme Court comes out. I mean, either way, I get a lot of calls. The main question everyone's asking is, when will Florida applications open up? And it will be largely dependent on how the Florida Supreme Court rules. I mean, even if the Florida Supreme Court affirms that case, that means the legislator will need to wait till they go back in session, most likely, draft a new statute, put out new rules, put out a new application, let people apply, go through the scoring process. And we know, Joe, we've gone through that just recently with Illinois. We know how long that process can take. So I don't see us I think we'll be another 8 to 18 months before we see any additional licenses issued. That is the question out there, of when these applications will be issued, has created a little bit of fluctuation on the valuation of some of these licenses. But quite honestly, the values are still holding strong. I mean, they're not where they were a couple of years ago at 67 million. But I'm starting to see more deals going through. There was a recent deal, probably I think the last one was the Green Growth Brands, which was in the 40s. But the deal flow I'm seeing right now is in the low 30s. I think we'll start seeing it get into the high 20s over the next couple months.
Yeah, the price of licenses tends to decline, but I really can't wait until Florida opens up so that a lot more entrepreneurs can get into Florida. And if the Supreme Court does open up the state for additional license offerings, I hope that and I've read some of your blog posts where you actually do advocate for the model that Illinois used to address the social justice reforms. And I think the social justice reforms now are all the more important, especially with the goings-ons of the protests over the past week. The type of social equity that they built into the Illinois law is quite powerful, but it does take some time to work. I mean, we have this R3 program in our Illinois program that attempts to rehabilitate and restore all these disproportionately impacted areas that were blighted by this drug war that has created a whole mess of problems. And Dustin and I worked on a couple of applications for these rounds. And yeah, he just mentioned like, well, when are we going to see in Illinois? I don't know. I'm not sure when we're going to see the licenses be announced, but a lot of people that have been planning their businesses are just in a limbo. And I did a piece on Article 18 of the new law. And so you have to address, how are you going to handle ties with these? Because if you're going to do a competitive application and you're going to engender lawsuits because somebody's going to say it was graded wrong, and I should have gotten a higher score. Okay, well, let's say that then everybody ties and they go into a lottery. It's just a lot harder to claim that you was wronged unless you weren't in the lottery. But, that didn't pass in Illinois. So it looks like Illinois may still be fertile ground for litigation. But, man, I'm just glad that there is some movement in Florida. That would be great. And I mean, seriously, what do you think True Leaf is worth? What do you think their license is worth? Like $400 million,
They're killing it. Just last quarter, I think they did top line revenue of almost 100 million. And what's even more impressive than that is that they're actually keeping that money and bringing it to the bottom line. And I think
they aren't there. That is the contrary of every cannabis stock I have ever seen. It's like, well, let's look at their earnings per share, negative something. Yeah, they're just losing money. Yeah,
they've done a great job at not only growing revenue but growing profits. They make up over 50% of the market here in Florida. So there's 22 licensees in Florida. Those 22 licensees, about 13 are operational. But really, out of those 13, about 5 of them make up probably over 80% of the sales. And out of those five, one of them, True Leaf, makes up over 50% of the sales. So
Yeah, you guys have a
those,
Google aspect to your state, which I don't necessarily like. I enjoy the ability for entry into this industry, and it's conceivable that even a low barrier to entry is still fairly high in this industry because of how regulated it is, and most people just don't have an extra $5 to $10 million lying around, and
yeah.
that's go ahead
And a lot
and
of people are they're the other thing with the Florida grown case, everyone's all excited, oh, more licenses, but there's a couple things they need to be concerned about. Number one, we don't know how many licenses they're going to issue. Number two, there's already 22 licenses that have been issued, and there's only almost 400,000 patients in Florida. So really, there is a sufficient amount of licenses to currently service the patients right now. So while I certainly advocate for more licenses and I want there to be more licenses, I also respect the economics of the situation and understand that we don't necessarily want to flood the market with licenses when probably once these 22 licenses start becoming fully operational, they should be able to service the patients in our state. So, that's another aspect I think people need to understand. After this Florida growing case, it's not like they're just going to say, all right, let's issue thousands of licenses. They may issue just a few, and we all know it's going to be extremely, extremely competitive.
and expensive. But I still think that Florida, Illinois, any legalized state can support a craft cannabis industry, which would be different than True Leaf. I mean, I've been to Tampa. My siblings live down there, and they're a great brewery culture. And you go to like one of the breweries in Tampa, it's not like that was cheap to build. Like that
Yeah.
brewery still has a high cost barrier to entry. What did you think? That cannabis was just going to be free to get into? No.
I love the concept of the craft grow. Really, it allows way more people to enter the market. Right now in Florida, there's literally no limitation on the size or the amount of grows that you could have if you have a license. So that's why Florida is really a super license. Not only could you grow, process, dispense, you could have an unlimited size. And actually, the dispensary cap actually expired back in April. So really now there's no cap on dispensaries either. So it's really, once you have a license in Florida, it's go do whatever it is you want. But now some of these licensees are getting a little bit smarter, and I'm working with some of the new licensees, a couple of these licenses that have flipped, and they're starting to see the value in not trying to build out like 100,000 square foot grow, but instead maybe having 10,000, 15,000 square foot grows spread out throughout the state. So rather than doing something really big, now they're even on their own volition doing something somewhat like a craft grow, where they're doing smaller grows spread out across the state so they can properly service the entire market. Because you do 100,000 square foot grow or 200,000 square foot grow, you could just have so many different problems, so many issues. We have hurricanes in Florida, so God forbid a hurricane comes. So they're starting to build in some redundancy in their operation. So I'm a big fan of craft grow concept, and obviously like the social equity concept, I think as well. I don't see Florida doing much with social equity. I work very closely with Minorities for Medical Marijuana. Eric Range is the chair for that. He's actually was on several of my applications for Illinois. And, we've talked at length about, what Florida can do from a social equity aspect. And we have some plans, and we're doing some advocacy work and some lobbying, but unfortunately, I don't know how successful we'll be with that.
Yeah, it's going to be something, and we don't necessarily know. And that's one of the things that it's hard to advise clients. It's like, well, we're not sure, but let's try to do our best and approach this in a reasonable way. And I do enjoy that they're actually approaching it like a business as opposed to a hustle, a stock raising game. Like, you just saw Canopy growth right down $1 billion of loss. I mean, wow. And then talk about big grows. They have, huge canopy space, and they're just making all sorts of flower, and the price is just crashing. And then I don't get how they're going to stay afloat.
Well, you saw Green Growth Brands. They bought their Florida license just a few months ago for in over $40 million, and now they're trying to get into bankruptcy. And I've heard rumors on the street for what it's trading at, much below what they actually paid for it just a few months ago. And then you have Acreage that did the same thing Canopy did. They went out and bought as many assets as they can, assets being licenses,
Leveraged them up.
and now they don't have the capital to operate. And I'll tell you, here in
Just
Florida,
did a $60 million raise.
Acreage is a mess. They spent, I think, 67 million on a license here, and they've opened up one dispensary, and it's really they just opened it up to meet the compliance requirements. They're really doing a nominal amount of sales. So that was just a complete blunder for Acreage. But then we got MedMen closing down stores in Florida. I mean, we have all the big MSOs are here in Florida. And as everyone knows in the industry, their cash situation is just dire. So it's funny because the dispensary cap went away, and you would think everyone would be gobbling up all this dispensary space, but quite the opposite's happening. They're actually closing down dispensary spaces because they don't have the capital to expand. So it's an interesting situation out here.